Hello everyone, hope you guys are doing well. We will begin with going through sample questions and answer them in detail to help you prepare for the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner exam. In case if you would like to purchase the entire set of practice questions, use the link in the description below. I request you to comment if you would like me to do these sample tests for any other AWS certification, and do subscribe to my channel, share the video and like the video. So let's get started. A startup organization uses the Cost Explorer tool to view and analyze its cost and usage. Which of the below statements are correct with regards to the Cost Explorer tool? Select two options. Well, Cost Explorer is a tool that enables you to view and analyze your cost. Here, you can view the historical cost data for a maximum of 12 months, beyond which the data is not available. And you can forecast your future cost only for a maximum of 12 months. Options A and B mention incorrect time periods for the length of time that you can view both the past and the future data and are incorrect. And in the recommendation section, you can view reserved instance purchase recommendations, not spot instance purchase recommendations. So option C is incorrect too. By using Cost Explorer, you can identify areas that need further inquiry and see the trends that you can use to understand your cost. So options D and E are the correct answers. The project team requires an AWS service that provides a file system mounted simultaneously from different EC2 instances. Which AWS service will satisfy this requirement? Option A is the correct answer, as with Amazon EFS, you can share files between many EC2 instances and on-premises servers via AWS Direct Connect or AWS Virtual Private Network. Amazon S3 is an object storage service. For example, you can use S3 as a storage for internet applications. Amazon Elastic Block Store provides block-level storage that can be attached to EC2 instances. To know the differences between block-level storage, file storage, and object storage, please review this web page. In short, object storage takes each piece of data and stores it as an object, whereas file storage stores the data in a folder to help organize, and block storage breaks down a file into blocks and stores them as separate pieces. Finally, option D is incorrect too, as Amazon FSx for Windows File Server provides a Windows file system, so you can easily move your Windows-based applications that require file storage in AWS. Which of the below statements is incorrect with regards to the advantages of moving to cloud? Well, with cloud computing, instead of investing heavily in servers and data centers, which are a capital expense, you only pay as you consume cloud services. So you trade variable expenses for capital expenses and not the other way around. Option A is the incorrect statement. All the other three options are advantages of cloud computing. The cloud provider, and not you, runs and maintains the data centers, so you deploy your app in minutes and benefit from the massive economies of scale. A project team requires implementing a threat detection service that continuously monitors malicious activities and unauthorized behaviors to protect AWS accounts, workloads, and data stored on S3. Which AWS service should they select? Option A is incorrect, as AWS Shield is a distributed denial of service protection service that safeguards applications running on AWS. Option B is incorrect, as AWS Firewall Manager helps you to centrally configure and manage firewall rules across your applications in AWS. Option C is the correct answer, as Amazon Guard Duty is a continuous security monitoring service that detects threats to your AWS environment. So anything related to threat protection, Amazon Guard Duty will be the right candidate. Option D is incorrect as well, as Amazon Inspector helps you analyze the behavior of applications running on AWS and identify potential security issues. Which of the following support plans offer 24/7 technical support via phone, email, and chat access to cloud support engineers? Select two options. Well, if you compare the AWS support plans, you will notice that 24/7 support via phone, email, and chat access to cloud engineers is available only for the business and enterprise plans. So options C and E are the correct answers. Option D is incorrect as there is nothing like a premium support plan. For basic and developer plans too, 24/7 support is not available. Which AWS product provides a unified user interface enabling easy management of software development activities in one place along with quick development, build and deployment of applications on AWS? Option A is incorrect as Amazon Cloud Guru is a machine learning solution that automates code reviews and improves code quality by identifying your application's most expensive lines of code. Option B is incorrect too, as AWS Code Build is a continuous integration service that compiles source code, runs tests, and produces software packages that are ready to deploy. AWS Code Artifact is an artifact repository service that allows for the creation of centralized repositories for sharing software packages across the development teams. It is an incorrect choice too. CodeStar facilitates the management of software development projects on AWS. Your team can collaborate, develop, build, and deploy applications on AWS with the help of a project management dashboard. As the question talks about management of software development activities, CodeStar is the correct answer. Which of the following services automate the discovery of sensitive data at scale and lowers the cost of protecting your data using machine learning and pattern matching techniques? As discussed, AWS Shield is a DDoS protection service that safeguards applications running on AWS, so it is incorrect. And Amazon GuardDuty is a threat detection service, so it is incorrect too. AWS Security Hub gives you a comprehensive view of security alerts and security posture across your AWS accounts. It is an incorrect choice. Option A is the correct answer, as Amazon Macy uses machine learning to identify and protect sensitive data stored in the AWS cloud. Security and compliance is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer. Which among the below are responsibilities of AWS? Select two options. Option A is incorrect because Amazon EC2 is categorized as infrastructure as a service. Doing all the necessary security configuration and management tasks within EC2 is customer's responsibility. AWS is responsible for patching and fixing flaws within the infrastructure, but customers are responsible for patching their guest OS and applications. So option B is incorrect and option E is one of the correct answers. Option C is incorrect as security of the data in the cloud is customer's responsibility. Also, option D is another correct choice as security of the cloud is the responsibility of AWS. Most up-to-the-minute information on AWS service availability could be determined from: well, the Service Health Dashboard displays the general status of all AWS services across different regions with up-to-the-minute information on AWS service availability. Service Health Dashboard is the correct answer. This is the AWS Personal Health Dashboard. It provides alerts and remediation guidance when AWS events may impact you. This dashboard gives you a personalized experience. Option C is incorrect because Amazon CloudWatch is a unified monitoring service for AWS services and your cloud applications. AWS Control Tower helps set up and govern multiple accounts and teams according to your company policies. It is incorrect too. Which of the below scenarios is not suitable for using the resource group for grouping the resources? In AWS, a resource group is a collection of AWS resources much similar to the concept of a resource group in Azure. If you have multiple resources, it is useful to create and manage them as a group with resource groups. For example, when you develop a web app, you can maintain separate sets of resources for development, staging, and production. Or you can group resources by departments, or maintain a resource group for each platform like Android and iOS. So it is evident that you would use resource groups for grouping resources that have something in common between them. Grouping resources that are used for different or unrelated projects is not a suitable scenario for using a resource group. A regulatory body requires a healthcare insurance company to administer cryptographic key management locally to ensure the safeguarding of sensitive patient data. How can the organization achieve this given that all their workloads are in the cloud? Well, honestly, you can use either Cloud HSM or AWS Key Management Service. Both generate and store encryption keys in AWS. The difference between them is AWS KMS is a multi-tenant service, which means your keys are in an encryption module shared with other AWS customers, whereas Cloud HSM gives you a separate hardware module. So if you have to ensure that your keys are completely isolated, go for Cloud HSM. Option B is incorrect because AWS Certificate Manager issues verified SSL certificates for AWS resources such as Elastic Load Balancer. Option D is incorrect too because server-side encryption encrypts data at rest within the Amazon S3 bucket. During an internal audit, auditors have requested the administrator to provide granular billing data for the main AWS account. The requirement is for the amount that a particular service accrued in an hour on the third day of a billing month. Can this information be obtained? Well, you can obtain this granular information from both AWS Cost and Usage Report and Cost Explorer within the Cost Management section. In the AWS Cost and Usage Report, you can obtain the data for any service accrued in any hour on a particular day. In the Cost Explorer, the hourly granularity is disabled by default. So first, you need to go to the Cost Explorer settings page and enable hourly data. Only then you can see the data at the required granularity in Cost Explorer. Although option A is correct too, let's select option C as the hourly data is available without the need for tweaking any setting. Option D is incorrect because the CloudTrail service will not contain billing information. Option B is incorrect too because it says we cannot fetch this information. I just showed you how you can do so. Following the AWS well-architected framework, how should a startup company with a dynamic AWS environment manage their users? Choose two responses. Option A is incorrect because creating multiple users with administrator privileges is not a security best practice. Permissions should be assigned based on the principle of least privilege. Option B is incorrect because AWS CloudFront Service is a content delivery network. It neither provides configuration templates nor performs this function. This statement is related to AWS CloudFormation. Option A is incorrect too, as provisioning compute that accommodates future growth is not cost effective. According to the reliability pillar of AWS well-architected framework, you should not guess your future capacity needs and pay only for what you use. It is better to filter unwanted traffic at VPC edge rather than on the host. It is a best practice to drop undesirable packets before they enter the AWS environment. Option D is a correct choice. In AWS, you can create an account structure with AWS organization to separate your cost across different organizational units. Option C is also a correct choice. In the AWS environment, what is the difference between instance metadata and user metadata? Instance metadata is data about your instance. For example, when creating an EC2 instance, the instance type, for example t2.micro, is an example of instance metadata. Or when configuring storage for the instance, information like the volume type EBS and the size 64 GB are also some of the examples of instance metadata. User data is information that is passed to the instance's OS to install or update a specific application. For example, in Linux systems, using a bash script in plain text. Option B is the correct answer. Option A is incorrect because user data is not the information stored and generated by AWS customers. Option C is incorrect too for the same reason. Option D is incorrect because instance metadata can be edited or altered after initial configuration and launch. It is not static, and it is wrong about the user data as well. The developers in the operations department want to use an IDE to run, test, and debug code for Lambda functions. Which AWS service is the most appropriate? Well, if you are aware about AWS services, the answer should immediately ring a bell. AWS Cloud9 is the only cloud-based IDE provided by Amazon which you can use to write and debug your code. With Cloud9, you create and run the environment in an EC2 instance that's deployed in a virtual private cloud. So these underlying resources are necessary for Cloud9 to operate. Option D is the correct answer. AWS Lambda lets you create serverless functions. It is not an IDE. AWS Code Deploy automates code deployments to compute services like EC2. It is an incorrect choice. AWS Code Commit is a source control that hosts Git-based repositories. An administrator likes to install and run the same CloudWatch agent configuration on 10 EC2 instances to collect custom metrics. What is the most efficient method to achieve this objective? First, let's talk about the parameter store in AWS Systems Manager, which is a centralized way to manage configuration data. You can store different types of data as parameter values. And with AWS Systems Manager, you can run commands to EC2 instances with an appropriate IAM role. In this case, the most efficient method is to configure the appropriate IAM role for the EC2 to install the CloudWatch agent. Once the agent is configured, the configuration is saved to the parameter store in SSM from where the other 9 instances can be configured. Option D is the correct answer. Option A is incorrect, as installing a third-party app on one of the EC2 instances is not the most efficient method. Option B is incorrect because configuring a script with parameters for the CloudWatch agent and then running it on each of the 10 EC2 instances is cumbersome and prone to error. Option C is incorrect because AWS Systems Manager cannot be configured on an EC2 instance. An administrator needs to manage many AWS accounts within a big organization. Which of the following is the most appropriate AWS service for an administrator to utilize? For managing many accounts within a big organization, AWS Organizations is the most suitable choice. With AWS Organizations, you can create new accounts, group accounts into organizational units, and allocate resources and apply organization-wide policies. Option A is incorrect because CloudTrail is a tool to track AWS API activities. Both IAM role and IAM policy are incorrect options as they are related to identity and permissions, which is unrelated here. A group of non-tech savvy friends are looking to set up a website for an upcoming event at a cost-effective price with a novice-friendly interface. Which AWS service is the most appropriate to use? Lightsail instances are in fact T2 family of EC2 instances. They have a limited and only a subset of features in EC2. If you try to create a Lightsail instance, you will notice that the USP of Lightsail is simplicity. Unlike the EC2 instances, Lightsail doesn't have a myriad of options to navigate through. There is virtually no learning curve for setting up Lightsail. Lightsail is targeted at beginners who just want a simple virtual private server. Using AWS Lightsail is the most appropriate choice. All the other options look complicated because they require installing a software on EC2 instance. EC2 is not for non-tech savvy people, but Lightsail is. Which of the following accurately describes a typical use case in which the AWS code pipeline service can be utilized? Code pipeline automates the build, test, and deploy phases of your release process every time there is a code change. Option D is the correct answer. Option A is incorrect because composing code in an IDE that enables you to test and debug is an AWS Cloud 9 function. Option B is incorrect because compiling and deploying microservices on EC2 is done by AWS Code Deploy. Option C is incorrect because sharing, collaborating on source code, and version control describe AWS Code Commit. A cloud solutions architect need to execute mission-critical tasks on the AWS Management Console but has left his Windows machine at home. What would be the most secure option to administer these tasks on the cloud, given that only non-graphical Linux-based machines are currently available? Well, the problem here is that the architect has forgotten his laptop at home and he couldn't just use any of the Linux machines to log into the console because they are all non-GUI based machines. The ideal solution would be to take those non-GUI Linux machines, install AWS CLI, which is a command line tool, and run commands to interact with AWS resources. So option D correctly describes this scenario. The first option is easy to eliminate, as you might already appreciate that sharing credentials over phone poses a high security risk. Option B is incorrect as well, as accessing the AWS Management Console via a third-party remote desktop software is insecure since the remote machine can be compromised itself. Option C, technically you can argue it is correct, but since the question asks for the most secure option, AWS CLI would be the right choice. Moving on to the next. Which of the following statements best describe the AWS Personal Health Dashboard? Select any two options. Now, there are two different dashboards that are seemingly similar that you can easily get confused and you need to know for this question. The Service Health Dashboard displays the general status of all AWS services across different regions, and this dashboard is updated every minute. Whereas the Personal Health Dashboard gives you a personalized view into the performance and availability of the AWS services that impact the AWS resources created in your account. So from the options, option B is correct and option C is correct too, as you can receive alerts and notifications within your Personal Health Dashboard. Option D sounds like Service Health Dashboard, as that's where you get the update on system outages every minute. A log of all service interruptions too is available in the Service Health Dashboard itself. Just if you scroll down here, there is a section called Status History where you can see a record of all the incidents of the past year. So option E is incorrect. Your organization is planning to migrate to AWS, but the management is concerned about the cost and initial investment needed. Which of the following features of AWS pricing would help your firm to lower the initial investment required for the migration? And select three options. So if you look at the pricing page of AWS, three important features are pay as you go, which means that you do not have any upfront cost and only pay when you use the services. The second one is save when you reserve. For example, there are 5 ways to pay for EC2 instances. On-demand instances are pay as you go with no upfront cost, but with reserved instances, you can get significant discounts on the upfront cost you pay. So if you look at the answer choices, options B, C and D are what we just discussed and are correct answers. Whereas the option A, which is the ability to choose a pricing vendor, is not a feature of AWS pricing. A startup that works on social media apps would like to grant developers temporary access to its Lambda functions on AWS. These developers would be signing in via Facebook authentication. Which service is the most appropriate to grant secure access? The scenario in this question is similar to this image, where the end user is a developer and he needs to have access to an AWS resource. In our case, it is a Lambda function. The developer signs in via an identity provider. In the question, it is Facebook authentication, and with the help of Cognito service, he gets temporary credentials to access Lambda functions. So the answer is Amazon Cognito for Web Identity Federation, which acts as a broker and sends temporary code to users so that they can access AWS resources. Option A is incorrect because the access required is temporary and from a social media sign-in. Creating an IAM user will grant access directly using the AWS credentials. Option C is incorrect because the IAM credentials will not authenticate on Facebook as they are confined to logging into the AWS environment. Option D is incorrect too because there is no need for a third-party web ID from federated access providers, since Amazon's Cognito service itself can perform that function. During an organization's information system audit, the administrator is requested to provide security and compliance reports as well as an online service agreement that exists between the organization and the AWS. Which service can they utilize to acquire this information? Well, if you search for artifact in the AWS console, you can see auditor issued reports like payment card industry reports or the SOC reports and so on. Also, you can view agreements with AWS like the NDA and the BAA agreements. So option A, AWS artifact, is the right answer. Option B is incorrect as AWS Resource Center is a repository of tutorials, white papers and project use cases that help you in learning the core concepts of AWS. With AWS Service Catalog, IT admins can create and distribute a catalog of approved products to end users. What this means is the end users have a simple portal to discover and launch products that comply with organizational policies. And option D is also incorrect because AWS Directory Service provides multiple ways to use Amazon Cloud Directory and Microsoft Active Directory with other AWS services. So none of the other options are about agreements and reports. An administrator runs his cloud infrastructure along best practices by leveraging Amazon Inspector and AWS Trusted Advisor. Which of the following statements correctly describe how this can be done? Select any two. First, let's understand what these services are all about. Amazon Inspector evaluates the security loopholes in your EC2 instances. So it installs an agent which will check all the vulnerabilities and provide a detailed report with suggested mitigations. AWS Trusted Advisor gives you a list of recommendations to optimize AWS resources around these 5 areas. So for example, if you click on the cost, it will give you recommendations that would decrease your cost footprint. The difference between the two is that Inspector is agent-based and looks for security vulnerabilities in your EC2 instances, whereas Trusted Advisor is your personalized cloud expert which can help you follow the best practices in the cloud. Looking at the options, option B describe trusted advisor and option C describe Amazon inspector. So if you understand these services, you can easily eliminate other options which just seem to mismatch their responsibilities. Why does it take between 24 to 48 hours for changes made to a hosted zone in Amazon Route 53 to reflect globally? Generally, DNS resolvers query for changes every 86,400 seconds, which means DNS resolver cache is stagnant for up to 24 hours. So the correct answer is option B. Option A is incorrect because AWS name servers save the changes made to hosted zones within 60 seconds. Option C is incorrect because Amazon Route 53 uses a global network of interconnected DNS servers which simultaneously take up changes to a hosted zone. The process does not occur in tandem. Option D is incorrect because Amazon Route 53 is not region specific, therefore it is not possible to determine in which AWS region changes are made. The next question: which of the following Amazon Web Services can be referred to as a serverless service? Select three options. First, let's understand the difference between a serverless and a managed service. Serverless means you pay as you use. If there is no traffic, you do not pay anything. If there are lots of traffic, the scaling is automatic and you pay according to the traffic. Whereas managed services have a minimum number of nodes running all the time and you pay for them, irrespective of whether you receive traffic or not. However, they are called managed services because you do not have to worry about patching, updates, networking, and backups. AWS automatically manages them for you. AWS Lambda is serverless because it lets you run or upload your code in various languages without provisioning or managing servers, and you only pay for what you use. AWS Cloud9 is a serverless, cloud-based integrated development environment to write, run, and debug your code with just a browser. Cloud9 has no upfront commitments and you only pay as you use. For DynamoDB, there are two pricing models. The on-demand pricing mode is serverless as you only pay per request. With provision capacity mode, you specify or reserve the capacity upfront. So all these three are serverless, but elastic load balancing is not serverless as you have to pay for every hour that the load balancer is running, irrespective of whether you receive any request or not. Your team is planning to host a development environment on the cloud which consists of EC2 and RDS instances. This environment will only be required for 2 months. Which types of instances would you use for this purpose? Now, there are several pricing plans for Amazon EC2 instances like on-demand instances, spot instances, reserved instances, and dedicated host. With on-demand instances, there are no upfront commitments and you only pay for the compute you use every hour. So option A is the best and the most cost-effective option. The problem with spot instances is that they can be terminated at any time with the fluctuation of market prices. As the question doesn't indicate this use case, we cannot assume the development team does not require high availability. Reserved instances require a minimum of 1 year commitment, so it is incorrect. Dedicated hosts are typically used when you do not want the underlying hardware to be shared with other customers. This is the most expensive option and typically would not be ideal for development purposes. Why is Amazon DynamoDB service best suited for implementation in mobile and Internet of Things and gaming applications? The use cases in the scenario have unstructured data in common. Therefore, the most appropriate attribute of Amazon DynamoDB is it is a flexible data model used for mobile and IoT solutions. So option B is correct. Option C is incorrect because the aspects of fault tolerance, disaster recovery, and high availability is also available in Amazon relational databases, so this is something not very specific to DynamoDB. Option D is incorrect as the consistency levels do not justify exclusive choice of DynamoDB over other services for the scenario mentioned in the question. And again, many other database services are fully managed, so option A is incorrect too. Your company is planning to use AWS Cloud, but there is a management decision that resources need to be split department-wise, which tends towards managing multiple AWS accounts. Which of the following would help in effective management and provide an efficient costing model? In a nutshell, this scenario is that there are multiple AWS accounts, one for each department in the organization, and which of these would help in effective management? Cost Explorer is clearly incorrect as it is related to managing AWS cost, which enables you to view and analyze your cost. AWS Trusted Advisor, which we have seen earlier, gives you a list of recommendations to optimize AWS resources. Again, incorrect. Amazon DevPay is just a way for developers to create apps around Amazon S3 and EC2, bill the customers, and get paid via Amazon's billing infrastructure. AWS Organizations is the right answer as it allows you to create multiple AWS accounts, manage them, and apply policies and so on. Which of the following services allows you to distribute load across multiple EC2 instances? Well, this question is pretty simple and the answer is AWS Elastic Load Balancer, which automatically distributes incoming traffic across multiple EC2 instances. Autoscaling automatically adjusts capacity by provisioning new EC2 instances in case the traffic increases, but it does not distribute compute capacity across EC2 instances. So option A is incorrect. AWS regions are physical AWS data center locations, and IAM is related to identity and access management, so they have no relation to load distribution. Therefore, options C and D are incorrect too. You have an application developed in .NET. This application works with S3 buckets in a particular region, and the application is hosted on an EC2 instance. Which of the following should ideally be used to ensure that the EC2 instance has the appropriate access to the S3 buckets? There are 4 options: users, groups, roles, and policies. Well, take a look at this image. You will understand the relationship between IAM users, groups, roles, and policies. An IAM user is an entity that represents a person or a service which interacts with AWS, and it generally consists of a username and a password. Whereas an IAM group is just a collection of IAM users. So you cannot assign either of the user or the group to the EC2 instance, and they are incorrect. A policy is an entity that defines a permission when attached to either a user or a role or a group. So by themselves, a policy cannot be assigned to the instance. The IAM role is very similar to a user, which determine what the identity can and cannot do. However, a role does not have any credentials like password associated with it. So you can attach a policy to a role and assign the role to the instance to grant permissions. So option C is correct. An ELB instance is configured with a default health check and response timeout intervals at 30 seconds and 5 seconds respectively. How long will it take for an instance within a target group to be labeled as out of service if it goes down a second after the latest health check? So health checks are sent by load balancer periodically to test the status of the registered EC2 instances with it, so that they can take prompt action if any of the instances are down. In this scenario, the health check runs every 30 seconds and the instance goes down 1 second into a new cycle, which means 29 seconds will elapse before a new health check is run. Additionally, it will take 5 more seconds for receiving the response, after which it would fail the health check. Therefore, 29 plus 5, so the answer is 34 seconds. Which of the following helps you set up a logically isolated section of your AWS cloud? An Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC, is a kind of physical network at your data center, just that it is on the AWS cloud and you access it via the internet. Well, it is called a virtual network because, unlike the physical network that connects the computers with cables and switches, a virtual network provides the same capabilities with the software. Amazon VPC is the right answer to this question, as it is dedicated to your AWS account and logically isolated from other virtual networks. Now you have the VPC here, and within the VPC, you typically organize your AWS resources by creating subnets. So you have 3 subnets here, and place resources that require internet connection in this subnet, and the private resources in another subnet, and the resources that connect to your corporate network in the third subnet. So technically, the subnets can communicate with each other, and they are not an isolated section of AWS, so the AWS subnet option is incorrect. AWS regions are physical locations like US East, where many different customers create their resources. And each region has multiple isolated locations known as availability zones. So when you launch EC2 instances, you can distribute them in different availability zones in a particular region, and when one instance in an availability zone fails, the instance in another availability zone can handle your request. A company wants to utilize AWS storage. For them, low storage cost is paramount, and since the data is rarely queried, data retrieval times spanning several hours are acceptable. What is the best storage option to use? Amazon Glacier is a storage service that's specifically optimized for infrequently used data or cold data. This service provides extremely low-cost storage, with customers storing data for as little as $1 per terabyte per month. The downside is that if you retrieve the data, it can take anywhere between a few minutes up to a few hours, and since the company is okay with long retrievals, option A is the right answer. Amazon S3 reduced redundancy storage enables you to store non-critical reproducible data at lower levels of redundancy than the S3 standard storage. So it is not relevant to the question. Elastic Block Store is a block storage service for use with Amazon EC2, kind of like hard drive for a VM, but doesn't provide the cheapest storage. And AWS CloudFront is a content delivery network to speed up the distribution of your static assets, so it doesn't meet the requirement as well. Which statements regarding VPC peering is accurate? Select any 2 options. A VPC peering is a network connection that can be established between 2 VPCs, so you can route traffic between them. The peering connection can be between any 2 VPCs in either the same or at different AWS regions, and connections can even be established if the VPCs are created in separate AWS accounts. This is possible because the logical networks still use the same common AWS backbone network infrastructure to communicate. So option A is correct. Option B is incorrect because VPC peering still works without the use of public IP addresses. Private IP address subnets can be routed between peers as long as their respective CIDR block ranges do not overlap. Option C is incorrect too because it is not possible to route traffic from one VPC peer through a transitive peer to get to a third VPC. You can check this in the documentation, which says that transitive peering is not allowed. Option D can easily be flagged as incorrect, as traffic between VPC peers in different AWS regions is encrypted by default. And you can use VPC peering to replicate data to geographically distinct locations for fault tolerance, disaster recovery, and redundancy. So option E is correct. In the AWS Billing and Management Service, which tool can provide usage-based forecast of estimated billing cost and usage for the coming months? AWS Cost Explorer is the right answer, as you can create user-defined forecast for future usage patterns. In the AWS Billing and Cost Management dashboard, launch Cost Explorer and go to the Cost Explorer section. Make sure the option to show the forecasted values is selected and select a future date value. Right now it is the month of August, and you can view the forecast for the next month by selecting start and end dates. Group by is not enabled with forecasting, so let's remove it, and that's how you would see the forecasted values for September. AWS bills is incorrect, as it will list the historical cost incurred over the past months, but it will not forecast the future cost. And finally, AWS reports and costage and usage reports refer to the same tool, and they just give a composite view of cost and resource usage, so the last two options are incorrect. In a fully managed service such as Amazon Aurora, what are the implications of the shared responsibility model? First, let's understand the shared responsibility model, which states that the security and compliance in AWS is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer. As you can see in this image, AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud, so they maintain the hardware, the host operating system, and the physical security of the facilities. Whereas the customer is responsible for the security in the cloud, so he is responsible for the data, encryption, identity, and other settings. Now, the exact level of responsibility of a customer or AWS depends on the kind of service and whether the service is a PaaS or an IaaS. For managed services like Amazon Aurora, AWS manages the infrastructure layer, the operating system, and the underlying instances, as these are abstracted away from the user, and customers are responsible for managing their data and granting the correct permissions. So option A is incorrect, as Amazon is not only responsible for the physical infrastructure, but they also need to maintain the underlying EC2 instances where the database reside. Option C and D are incorrect, as the user is not responsible for operating system updates, patching of software, and the security of the underlying EC2 instances. AWS is responsible for them for managed services like Amazon Aurora. Only option B is close enough, as it says that Amazon is responsible for the underlying instances, its patching, and software updates. A website for an international sports governing body would like to serve its content to viewers from different parts of the world in their vernacular language. Which is the most suitable service that will allow different language versions of the same website to be served according to the location of the user? Option B is incorrect, as the CDN just distributes the cached content closest to the user using AWS infrastructure and edge locations. Option A, Amazon CloudFront, is the content delivery network in AWS, is also incorrect, as CloudFront will not be able to meet the requirement without the use of Lambda Edge functions, which can run code to deliver a site in different language versions based on the user's location. Option C is incorrect as well, as Amazon Lightsail is mainly for developers to deploy, test, and host web applications, especially in the early phases of the project. With Amazon Route 53, which is nothing but a DNS web service, configuring geolocation routing lets you choose different resources to serve content based on the origin of the DNS queries. This means that you can localize your content and present some or all of your website in the language of the users. So option D is the right answer. Which of the following security requirements are managed by AWS? Select 3 answers from the options given below. As per the shared responsibility model, physical security and anything to do with hardware like disk disposal and hardware patching is the responsibility of AWS. So options C, D and E are the correct answers. Which of the following features of Amazon RDS allows for better availability of databases? Choose the answer from the options given below. A VPC peering is a network connection between two VPCs that enable you to route traffic between them. It is completely unrelated to the question. Multi-AZ is the correct choice as it means Amazon RDS automatically provisions a standby replica in a different availability zone. In the event of a DB instance failure, RDS will automatically fail over to the standby instance. This improves database availability. Read replica is creating a replica of your primary database. This is useful for read-heavy workloads as they can query the read replica instead of the primary database. Unlike multi-AZ, using only read replica doesn't improve database availability because if the primary instance goes down, there is no secondary instance which can support write operations to failover to. It is an incorrect choice. Your company is planning to host a large e-commerce application on AWS. One of their major concerns is internet attack such as DDoS. Which of the following services can help mitigate this concern? Choose 2 answers from the options given below. For DDoS attacks, one of the answers is AWS Shield, which offers managed DDoS protection. Well, AWS CloudFront by itself doesn't protect against DDoS attacks, but when combined with AWS Shield, Web Application Firewall and Route 53, they offer protection against various network and application layer attacks. So both options A and B are the correct answers. AWS Config is a cloud auditing tool that provides an inventory of resources so admins can track assets to analyze compliance and security. For AWS shared responsibility model, which of the following responsibilities is not part of shared controls for which both customer and AWS are responsible? In the AWS shared responsibility model, AWS is responsible for security of the cloud and customer is responsible for security in the cloud. However, both AWS and customer share the responsibilities for 3 controls: patch management, configuration management, and awareness and training. For patch management, AWS is responsible for patching the infrastructure, but customers are responsible for patching their guest OS. For configuration management, AWS maintains the configuration of its infrastructure, but customers are responsible for configuring their guest OS, databases, and applications. For awareness and training, each AWS and customers train their own employees. What is the value of having AWS cloud services accessible through an application programming interface? Well, the value of using API is that it allows you to interact with AWS resources programmatically. Option A is the correct choice. Using API doesn't reduce your cost. Option B is incorrect. Option C looks completely irrelevant, and option D is incorrect because AWS API enables the customer to manage only the AWS resources and not the on-premises ones. There is an external audit carried out on your company. The IT auditor needs to have a log of all access to the AWS resources in the company's account. Which of the below services can assist you in providing these details? CloudTrail captures a log of all actions in your AWS environment. So it enables governance, compliance, and auditing of your AWS accounts. AWS CloudTrail is the correct choice. AWS CloudWatch looks similar to CloudTrail, but it focuses on the activity of AWS services. It answers the question, what is happening on AWS, whereas CloudTrail answers the question, who did what on AWS. AWS SNS is a push notification service. It is not related to the question here. An organization has a persistently high throughput. It requires connectivity with no jitter and very low latency between on-premises and AWS to support real-time services. What is the most appropriate solution that meet its requirement? For connections between AWS Cloud and on-premises environment, AWS Direct Connect is the correct choice. Direct Connect doesn't rely on internet but uses a dedicated private network connection so it can support high throughput and low latency. All other options are incorrect as they are related to the streaming service. For example, AWS Kinesis Data Streams is a data streaming service. AWS Kinesis analyzes video and data streams in real time, and Kinesis Data Firehose loads streaming data into various destinations like data lakes and data stores. A web administrator maintains several public and private web resources. Which service keeps track of the expiry dates of SSL certificates as well as updating and renewing them? AWS Certificate Manager manages the challenges of maintaining SSL certificates, including certificate renewals, so you don't have to worry about expiring certificates. Option D is the correct choice. All the other options are not related to handling certificates. AWS Data Lifecycle Manager automates the creation of EBS snapshots. AWS License Manager makes it easier to manage your software licenses from vendors such as Microsoft and Oracle. AWS Firewall Manager centrally manages firewall rules across your accounts. Which of the following are best practices when designing cloud-based systems? Choose two options. Build loosely coupled components so that even if one component fails, the entire system is still operational. Option B is correct, and so option A is incorrect. If you build with an assumption that everything will fail, you can ensure that the right measures are in place to build a highly available and fault-tolerant system. Option C is another correct choice. What is the concept of an AWS region? A region is a physical location that consists of multiple availability zones. Option C is the correct answer. Which of the following attributes determine the cost of on-demand EC2 instance? Choose three options. Well, the cost definitely depends on the region, the instance type, and the operating system that you use. Options A and C are the correct answers. AMI type is nothing but the Amazon Machine Image type. It generally refers to an image that includes an operating system. So option B is correct too. When using on-demand instances in AWS, which of the following is a false statement when it comes to the costing for the instance? Well, on-demand instances are the ones which you spin up when you need compute capacity on demand and you pay no upfront cost and only pay as you use. They let you pay by the hour or second based on the hourly rate. Once you terminate, your costs stop accumulating. So option C is a false statement for on-demand instances and is the correct answer to this question. Which of the following tools can be used to create an estimated cost for a new solution to be deployed on AWS cloud infrastructure? For creating an estimated cost for a new solution, AWS Pricing Calculator will be the most suitable choice. Here, you can create an estimate for any service. Let's do that for EC2. Select all the different variables like the region, OS, memory, etc., and you can view your estimated cost. Option D is the correct answer. Other options do not provide an estimate. AWS Cost and Usage Report will provide comprehensive data for usage. AWS Budget helps set up a custom budget to track usage for AWS resources. And AWS Cost Explorer helps you to visualize and manage AWS cost over time. To maximize user satisfaction, you need to improve the performance of the application. So you monitor the application endpoint health and route traffic to the appropriate endpoint. Which service will you use? AWS Global Accelerator sends your users' traffic through AWS network infrastructure, improving user performance. Specifically, it optimizes the user-to-application path. This may sound similar to Amazon CloudFront, but there is a difference. CloudFront is designed to handle HTTP, whereas Global Accelerator is used for both HTTP and non-HTTP protocols such as TCP and UDP. Other options are incorrect. S3 transfer acceleration accelerates the transfer of files to the S3 bucket by utilizing edge locations. Fully managed DynamoDB accelerator or DAX is an in-memory cache for DynamoDB. A member account in an AWS organization using consolidated billing wants to receive a cost breakdown report so that he can do the analysis of cost and usage. Where can this report be configured to be delivered? Well, the billing reports cannot be received in S3 buckets owned by member accounts. The report delivered to the S3 bucket must be owned by the master account. After that, the data in the S3 bucket can be analyzed using standard SQL queries. Option B is the correct answer. Once you are done, submit the test and you can verify your performance from the result. Also, you get the performance report domain-wise, so you can analyze the questions for any particular domain and you will see all the questions related to that domain and their correct answers and explanation for each question, and also links to the AWS documentation in case you like to learn the concept in depth. So if you're serious about clearing Cloud Practitioner exam, check the description for the link to entire practice test that cover the length and breadth of all the objectives in the exam. Also, please comment if you would like me to do this sample test for any other AWS certification, and do subscribe, share and like the video.